Sometimes I think we need to leave the past in the past because there have been some very disturbing things that humans have done. Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. I'm your host Emily, and today we're counting down our list of the top 10 unsettling vintage photos we were never supposed to find. So in advance, I am sorry for showing these to you. Number 10. The nuclear shadows of Hiroshima. With Oppenheimer out in theaters, why not start off this list about the bombing of Hiroshima? For those of you who don't know, on the 6th and 9th of August 1945, the United States detonated 2 atomic bombs over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, respectively. The aerial bombings together killed between 129,000 and 226,000 people, most of whom were civilians, and remain the only use of nuclear weapons in an armed conflict. Now, for all the people who lost their lives, only a nuclear shadow remained. When the bomb detonated at 1,900 feet above the city center of Hiroshima, the subsequent explosion caused temperatures of 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit to annihilate nearly everything within 1,600 feet of the bomb's blast zone. Almost anything and anyone within a mile was destroyed. The bomb's light and heat were so extreme that they bleached the city's exposed surfaces, except in places where an unsuspecting person shielded the building or sidewalk or bridge from the blast with their own body in their final moments alive. It's truly disturbing that people were just enjoying their lives and it was gone in an instant, and that you can physically see that with the shadows. Number 9. Radium Girls. The Radium Girls were female factory workers who contracted radiation poisoning from painting radium dials, watch dials, with hands with self-luminous paint. The incident occurred at 3 facilities in the United States, one in Orange, New Jersey beginning around 1917, one in Ottawa, Illinois beginning in the early 1920s, and one in Waterbury, Connecticut also in the 1920s. After being told that the paint was harmless, the women in each facility ingested deadly amounts of radium after being instructed to point their brushes on their lips in order to give them a fine tip, and some also painted their fingernails, faces, and teeth with the glowing substance. The prolonged exposure to the radium caused dental pain, loose teeth, lesions, and ulcers, and the failure of tooth extractions to heal were some of these conditions. Many of the women later began to develop anemia, bone fractures, and caused their vertebrae to collapse and their jaws to swell up and fall off. And their lives were slowly ended in agony while battling cancer. The photo here shows one of these victims, and it's truly heartbreaking. Number 8. Crime scene message. Called the lipstick killer, William Herons liked to take the lives of women. On June 5, 1945, Josephine Ross was discovered deceased in her home. She had been pierced repeatedly with a blade and was clutching dark-colored hairs in her hands. Nearly a year later, Frances Brown was discovered deceased with a blade lodged in her neck and a bullet wound, and what they found at the crime scene was scary. Written in lipstick on the wall, a message said, "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself." Now, the man responsible, William Herons, was caught soon after the message was discovered and was convicted for ending the lives of several people. At the time of his death, William was reportedly Illinois' longest-serving prisoner, having spent 65 years in prison. He spent the later years of his sentence at the Dixon Correctional Center in Dixon, Illinois. Though he remained imprisoned until his death, William had recanted his confession and claimed to be the victim of coercive interrogation and police brutality. So who really knows the truth, but that message is haunting, and I can't even imagine what was going through the heads of the first responders who found it. Number 7. The Exorcism of Anneliese Michel. Anneliese Michel was a German woman who underwent 67 Catholic exorcism rites during the year before her death. When she was younger, she experienced a seizure and was diagnosed with psychosis caused by temporal lobe epilepsy. Shortly thereafter, she was diagnosed with depression and was treated by a psychiatric hospital. By the time she was 20, she'd become intolerant of various religious objects and began to hear voices. After the taking of psychiatric medications for 5 years failed to improve her symptoms, Anneliese and her family became convinced that she was possessed by a demon. As a result, her family appealed to the Catholic Church for an exorcism, and while rejected at first, 2 priests got permission from the local bishop in 1975. The priests began conducting exorcism sessions, and the parents stopped consulting doctors. A total of 67 exorcism sessions, 1 or 2 each week, lasting up to 4 hours each, were performed over approximately 10 months in 1975 and 1976. None of these worked or improved her condition, and it resulted in her dying of malnutrition at the age of 23 in 1976, weighing just 68 pounds. Now, this is a ghastly photo of her when she was possessed, and I can't imagine what that poor girl went through. Number 6. The Dyatlov Pass Incident. The Dyatlov Pass Incident was an event in which 9 Soviet hikers died in the northern Ural Mountains between February 1st and 2nd, 1959, under uncertain circumstances. This creepy photo shows the determined group traversing in the harsh terrain just before they met their fate on the night of February 1st. Now, what happened? The experienced trekking group from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, led by Igor Dyatlov, had established a camp in the Russian SFSR of the Soviet Union. Now, overnight, something caused them to cut their way out of their tent and flee the campsite while inadequately dressed for the heavy snowfall and sub-zero temperatures. After the group's bodies were discovered, an investigation by Soviet authorities determined that 6 of them had died from hypothermia, while the other 3 had died by physical trauma. 1 victim had major skull damage, 2 had severe chest trauma, and another had a small crack in his skull. 4 of the bodies were found laying in running water in a creek, and 3 of those 4 had damaged soft tissue of the head and face, and 2 of the bodies had missing eyes, 1 had a missing tongue, and 1 had missing eyebrows. No one's really too sure what happened to them and why it happened either, but it's just strange. Number 5. Shell-shocked soldier. Before shell shock was called war neurosis or post-traumatic stress disorder, and before experts actually began to understand the psychological trauma that the war could cause, veterans of World War I were largely left to fight their own mental health battles. Now, shell shock is a word that originated during World War I to describe the type of post-traumatic stress disorder that many soldiers experienced during the war. It is a reaction to the intensity of the bombardment and fighting that produced a helplessness which could manifest as panic, fear, flight, or an inability to reason, sleep, talk, or walk. During the war, the concept of shell shock was poorly defined, and cases of shell shock could be interpreted as either physical or psychological injury. Now, the creepy historical image of the shell-shocked soldier seen here starkly highlights the horror of the war and what being stuck in the trenches during the Battle of Flers-Courset could do to a man. Captured in September 1916, this photo was taken years before World War I even ended. By the time the end came, countless other men would suffer a similar fate. Number 4. The Frozen Man of Mount Everest. In May 1996, mountain climber Beck Weathers and his team attempted to complete their ascent of Mount Everest. Although they only had a small stretch to go, Beck came down with a bad case of snow blindness, and after getting stuck in a harrowing blizzard with a wind chill of 100 degrees below zero, he fell into a hypothermic coma. Frostbite set on his nose and hands, both of which were later amputated. Miraculously, he managed to survive, walked back to camp, and was airlifted for treatment. Initially, I thought I was in a dream, Beck later recalled. Then I saw how badly frozen my right hand was, and that helped bring me around to reality. Now, for those of you who don't know, climbing Mount Everest is extremely dangerous, and it's a miracle that he's alive. Number 3. The Human Dolls. Anatoly Moskvin is a Russian former journalist, college professor, and self-dubbed necropolist with expert knowledge of cemeteries. Now, this man was a little strange as he loved collecting dolls. He had many, and the figures he had resembled antique dolls. They wore fine and varied clothing, some wore knee-high boots, and others had makeup over their faces Anatoly had covered in fabric. He had also hidden their hands in fabric, except these dolls were not dolls, they were mummified corpses of human girls. Yeah, you heard that right. He was obsessed with digging up the dead and making dolls out of their corpses. After making his human dolls, he kept them in his home as his companions and lovers. I kissed her once, then again, Anatoly wrote about one of his dolls, made from the body of a young girl. Police finally caught him in 2011 after years of increasing suspicion at the growing number of discarded graves in his home city. When the police searched his home, they found 26 life-size dolls, or rather mummified corpses, scattered throughout. When police moved one of the bodies, it played music as if on cue, as inside the chests of many of the dolls, Anatoly had embedded music boxes. There were also photographs and plaques taken off the gravestones, doll-making manuals, and maps of local cemeteries strewn about the apartment. Police even discovered that the clothes worn by the mummified corpses were the clothes in which they were buried. Now, this is just overall disturbing. I just can't. Number 2. Michael Rockefeller. Michael Rockefeller, the son of New York Governor and soon-to-be U.S. Vice President Nelson Rockefeller, disappeared somewhere in Papua New Guinea in the early 1960s. Seen here smiling on his first trip there in May 1960, you wouldn't be aware of his fate. In November 1961, he traveled to the jungles of New Guinea to spend time with the native Asmat tribes when he went missing. Despite a 2-week search and a witness who supposedly saw him swimming in the ocean, his body was never found. A theory of what happened is that he was eaten by people, as the Asmat tribes were involved in that practice and sometimes ended people's lives as a part of rituals. It's also been said that his boat overturned near the Asmat region of the island. The boy swam to the shore to look for help, and that's it. No one ever saw him again. But at least some members of the local tribes have told stories indicating that Michael's life was ended upon reaching the shore, and his body was cut up and the parts were handed out as gruesome trophies. Regardless of what happened, it's just a sad situation overall. And coming in at number 1 is human zoo. You think animal zoos are bad? Just wait until you hear about us humans putting other humans in a zoo. Human zoos were public displays of people, usually in so-called natural or primitive states. They were most prominent during the 19th and 20th centuries. In the 1870s, exhibitions of so-called exotic populations became popular throughout the Western world. Human zoos could be seen in many of Europe's largest cities, such as Paris, Hamburg, London, Milan, as well as American cities such as New York City and Chicago. Now, these photos were taken in 1904, where the US government imported 1,300 indigenous Filipinos from different tribes to display at the St. Louis Exposition in 1904. There's also one girl known as the Filipino Zoo Girl, and she was displayed at the Coney Island Zoo in 1904. She was a zoo attraction among the monkeys and lizards to show off the new US possessions in the Philippines. She was bound by ropes and visitors threw her peanuts, and it was just overall disgusting how they were treated. Well, that's all for our list of the top 10 unsettling vintage photos we were never supposed to find. Which photo do you think is the creepiest? Let us know in the comments down below, and hey, while you're down there, why not like and subscribe to our channel? I'm your host Emily, and we'll see you next time. Peace.